Good morning and welcome to the Japan Society's regular webinar on current affairs and business. I'm Bill Emmott and I have the honor and pleasure of chairing the Japan Society. Thank you all, as always, for your continued support for the Japan Society. Our subject today is trade, which means the business relationship between the UK and Japan. We're here to discuss and explore the recently completed UK-Japan Comprehensive Economic Partnership arrangements, which in plain language means the deal between our two countries about the terms of trade and business that will apply once the UK leaves the trade arrangements of the European Union. But first, let me put that into a wider context. The past several years have seen a period of increased trade protectionism around the world, especially led by the former leader of free trade, the United States, and increased skepticism or even hostility to the World Trade Organization, the body set up in the early 1990s to oversee global trading rules. Japan has been a notable standout against that trend. It negotiated in 2018 a broad agreement with the European Union. Along with Australia, Japan also rescued and adapted the Trans-Pacific Partnership Arrangement between 11 Asia-Pacific nations after America, which had initiated the TPP, withdrew from it in 2017. And recently, a broader group of countries, including Japan, signed a less ambitious but still welcome trade deal for Asia called the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, RCEP. And last but not least for today's purpose, this autumn, Japan completed the UK-Japan CEPA, which is what we are discussing today. With our Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, travelling to Brussels for the final stage of negotiations about Britain's future trade arrangements with the European Union, I think it would be fair to say that the UK's own future trade strategy and circumstances necessarily remain unclear. Those trade talks with our biggest trading partners and nearest neighbours will necessarily also shape the trade arrangements that the UK will make beginning in 2021 with other big economies, including, most importantly, the United States of America. But Japan got in first, or the UK got in first with Japan, with the first post-Brexit trade deal by the UK with any major economy. So what does the UK-Japan Comprehensive Economic Partnership Arrangement mean? What are its innovations? What business sectors will be most affected? And how might it, in turn, be affected by whatever is the outcome of our Prime Minister's talks in Brussels this week? To answer these questions, we are very fortunate indeed to have two distinguished and especially well-informed speakers, both in the UK, but both Japanese. Hiroshi Matsuura just arrived in the UK 2 weeks ago to take up his new role as Deputy Chief of Mission at the embassy here. But before then, he acted as Chief Negotiator for Japan over the UK CEPA. Some of you may also have known him when he was previously posted here in London as Economic Minister. And Minako Morita-Jaeger is a trade specialist who is a fellow at the very highly regarded Trade Policy Observatory at the University of Sussex. She has frequently given evidence to parliamentary hearings, as well as offering expert commentary to the media, including on the UK-Japan CEPA. As usual, each of our speakers will open with 10 minutes of remarks, following which we will have a discussion and, most important of all, your questions. As usual, please submit questions using the Q&A function and do vote for other people's questions if you'd like me to elevate them and spot them. I've asked Hiroshi Matsuura to begin, giving the view from Japan, albeit now welcome in London. Over to you, Hiroshi. Welcome to the Japan Society and welcome back to London.
Thank you, Bill. Thank you for the kind introduction, and it's very nice to be back to the Society. As Bill introduced, I was in London for 3 years as the Minister for Economic Affairs until 3 years ago. And in the 3 years, among the 3 years I spent in Tokyo, one of the 3 years I worked as ambassador for economic diplomacy, and one major job was the chief negotiator for Japan-UK new trade agreement. So the negotiation of this agreement took 3 months, from June 6th to September 11th, and we got it signed on October 23rd. Now the parliamentary approval procedure is over for Japan last week and for UK this week. So the agreement is now fully ready to go into effect on January 1st of next year. So I'd like to speak about the agreement from my perspective in 3 points. One is what made the agreement necessary, and second is what the agreement has achieved, and lastly, broader significance beyond bilateral trade. So first, what made the agreement necessary? It is well known that the present Japan-UK trade is preferential trade under the Japan-EU Trade EPA, but it is only until the end of this year. So to avoid business disruption by going back to the WTO terms, it was necessary to conclude a new one by the end of this year. So we did it. All goods traded are given at least the same treatment as under the Japan-EU EPA. And also rules of origin is set, in effect, to take EU materials and EU parts as British origin or Japan origin, so that goods produced in UK or Japan using EU materials and parts will continue to benefit the preferential treatment. So that's the essence, why it is necessary. And the second, what the agreement has achieved. Of course, this continuity element, which I explained 1 minute ago, was the essential one for this agreement. But it achieved beyond the continuity. So now the Japan-UK agreement is more advanced and more liberalized than Japan-EU agreement. So this is where we take pride in, as the agreement, as this agreement is different from the bunch of the continuity agreements, which the UK had concluded with 30-some trading partners of the EU, which means that this agreement is first of that kind for UK as an independent trading nation outside of the European Union. We take pride also, as this is where we realized some of what we had wished but not been able to realize in the Japan-UK negotiations. So our medals of honor includes first, digital trade, free flow of data, and the prohibition of requiring establishing computer-related facilities, prohibition to require disclosing encryption information, prohibition to require disclosing source code, including algorithms, and etc. So this is the level of freedom beyond the Japan-EU, but also beyond the TPP as well. So it's very close to the level which Japan achieved at the Japan-US trade agreement last year. The second about the financial services, just in line with the digital trade, the agreement provided the free flow of information and also provided the prohibition of requiring establishing computer-related facilities. And also it provides the cooperation between the authorities. This is at the level of TPP, and now it also goes beyond the Japan-EU level. I also like to give particular highlight to the movement of people, because this is where the business benefit will be felt by a broad range of Japanese companies in operation in Britain. Now, Japan-EU agreement also has the movement of people chapter to facilitate intra-company transfer by direct investors. And this chapter is binding both for Japan and the EU, but the UK government has made a reservation. Therefore, in effect, presently, in the context of Japan-UK bilateral relationship, Japan unilaterally makes commitment in this area. But in this agreement, the UK has committed to important part of what Japan has already committed to. For example, the same visa treatment will be given to the spouses and children as the ICTs themselves. And the second, standard processing period for work permit is provided not to exceed the 90 days. Well, I hope these achievements will promote strongly the trade and investment between our two countries. Lastly, I'd like to touch on the broader significance beyond bilateral trade from the Japan's point of view. Well, FTAs and EPAs today is a basic vehicle for strengthening overall bilateral relationships. Now, throughout the modern history of Japan, UK has always been a key European partner, arguably the most important European partner. If the next year came without this agreement, Japan will be in a position in which it has EPA with all of the European partners, except for the most important one. That is a very awkward framework for the Japanese-European diplomacy, but thank God there will be a proper treaty framework for Japan-UK partnership. The second significance I would like to highlight is the avenue for UK's accession to TPP. The UK government has already expressed the intention to join TPP, and Japan welcomes it. As it was said by the Trade Secretary Truss, Japan-UK agreement can work as a stepping stone for UK's accession to TPP. Now, as you know, TPP is a platform for the next generation trade. Potentially, it can even serve as a global platform for faster trade liberation globally. As it is now, it is only a regional platform in Asia Pacific, but once UK accedes to it, the characteristic will be changed and it will acquire global nature. Then we will see the possibility of bringing other truly free trading nations committed to liberal commerce principles from various parts of the world to TPP as well. If that happens, we could hope that the TPP as a global platform may revitalize the WTO's function to liberalize the global trade once again, serving as its core driving engine. Well, this would be a very important development for the future of free trade. So all in all, Tokyo regards this agreement as very significant and is pleased to see that London does likewise. So let me stop here and give the floor back to Bill. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much, Matsuura-san. That's been very, very helpful and comprehensive. And I think particularly myself, anyway, I want to ask a bit more about that avenue to the TPP point and the thought of the TPP as a platform for revitalizing the WTO, I think, which is a very interesting point, which is not well appreciated or understood, at least in the UK. So at least in the unofficial circles of the UK, I mean. But thank you. So Minako, Morita-Jaeger, over to you to give the trade specialist's view.
Thank you very much, Bill. First of all, thank you very much for introducing me, Bill. But Bill forgot to say one thing about me, which is Bill is very special for me since the first book, the first thick English book I bought by myself was his book, The Sun Also Sets, when I was young. And his journalism impacted me a lot to know about the world and its relation with Japan. So it's pity that this is a virtual meeting and I cannot ask you to just bring my book for your signature today, but maybe another time. And also that it is my great honor to speak about Japan-UK CEPA today. Well, from now on, let me just call it CEPA. I'd like to deliver big congratulations to Mr. Matsuura for the successful conclusion of the FTA, so which enables a smooth transition from the EU-Japan EPA without any economic disruption. So then the Japan-UK CEPA is very important to just analyzing it is very important because this is going to be the benchmark for UK's future trade policy. And from that perspective, maybe my presentation today is from the UK's perspective or from the academic perspective, and sometimes we may be critical, but allow me to be that. So could you just go to them? Yes, thank you. So I'd like to talk about the SEPA, focusing the 3 points today. First, overviewing its economic rationales. And then second, I evaluate SEPA in comparison with Japan EU EPA. I call it Japan view. And lastly, I talk about economic and social implication from the UK's perspective. And to vitalize my points, let me start my, thank you so much, Heidi. And so first of all, as an introductory, I'd like to touch upon the underlying limits of SEPA. So which is the EU-Japan-UK trilateral relation. In terms of economics, there is a strong trilateral trade investment relationship as a product of the Japanese and UK firms' global value chains and supply chains in Europe. So goods trade, service trade, and data trade, investment, movement, people are connected to each other. So 3 sides connected to each other. For example, 59% of UK goods imports from Japan and 44% of UK exports to Japan are intermediate goods. So important to note in this context is the role of Japanese companies. So Japanese companies have established a business model in the 1980s and uses the UK as a hub for business in Europe. So in terms of policy, before the UK departed EU, the 2 sides of this triangle, the Japan, UK, Japan, EU, were under the EU-Japan EPA framework. And EU-UK relation was on EU customs union and single market terms. The condition of Japanese business model was that UK as a member of the EU customs union and the EU single market. Since the UK left the EU and the transition period will be over within a month, so the frictionless trade between the UK and the EU will be over. So SEPA could cover only one side of this trilateral relationship, unfortunately. So this is a reality. And could you go to the next slide? Thank you. So what kind of economic rationales exist in terms of trade investment relation between the UK and Japan? So Japan is the UK's 4th largest non-EU export market, and the UK's goods export to Japan account for 1.9% of its total goods exports, and its service exports account for 1.56% of its total service exports. So also the UK's goods imports from Japan has been fluctuated over the last 20 years, as the figure shows. The UK's goods and services exports, as well as services imports from Japan, show upward trend, especially after 2015, even with or without EU-Japan EPA. The impact of the EU-Japan EPA entered into force February 2019 cannot be clearly seen at the aggregated level here. And next slide, please. So investment relation is the heart of the UK-Japan relation, especially for the UK. Japanese companies play an important role in the UK economy, creating 167,000 jobs in the UK. And the UK is the 2nd largest FDI destination from Japan, accounting for $171 billion of FDI stock in 2019. So Japanese investment to Europe has been concentrated in the UK, accounting for almost 40% of its total FDI stock. So this figure, so the next slide, please. So this figure shows very interesting economic fact. That is, more than half of the UK service exports, about £75 billion, are generated from foreign-owned firms, including Japanese companies. So given that Japan is the largest foreign investor abroad, accounting for $227 billion in 2019, retaining existing Japanese investment and keeping UK's attractiveness for Japanese investment is a key for the UK's economy. So amid double uncertainty of post-Brexit relation with EU and COVID-19. So I would like to look at SEPA from this perspective. So could you go to the next slide? Yes. So normally, trade negotiators like Matsuura-san or international experts like me are only people who have a chance to see the trade agreement. And so I just would like to show the structure of the SEPA first. The UK-Japan SEPA consists of 24 chapters with annexes and protocol of mutual recognition agreement. And there are the two main categories to explain about trade agreements. One is market access liberalization, and the other is about rulemaking. That means making provision of the text. And market liberalization under SEPA, so as EU-Japan EPA, covers trading goods, trading services, and investment. Market access commitments in SEPA are almost identical to those under EU-Japan, where there's some exceptions. So as for UK export to Japan, among the 9,444 tariff line products, there are only 10 tariff lines, such as birds, eggs, beverages, spirits and vinegars, and so on. For UK export in SEPA is marginally lower than the EU-Japan EPA. However, the UK did not export any of these 10 products on these lower tariffs over the last 3 years. So that rest of the products have identical tariff schedules. Regarding the UK's imports from Japan, the UK applied a use tariff concession in the EU-Japan EPA, except for speed reduction of tariff for some industrial goods, such as some automobile inputs, rail cars and the rail car inputs, turbojets and then turbojet inputs, and the electronic control panels. So that interestingly, for all but 2 of these products, the UK MFN tariff, which is called the UK Global Tariff, is in any case 0. So 0 tariff under the MFN. So likewise, liberalization commitments on service trade investment under SEPA are almost identical to those in EU-Japan EPA, except for some cases. Because I have to be short, I can't say in details here, but then I just like to mention one thing relating to movement of personnel for business purposes, which Matsuura-san explained in detail. But my point is, yes, the UK commitment under EU-Japan is less than what the EU's levels are offered. And then under SEPA, UK's commitment is, well, the UK improved its commitment, but not entirely improved reciprocal basis in SEPA. And that is also Matsuura mentioned. This is very critical issue because the movement personnel is very important for Japanese companies from the investment perspective. So maybe the UK could have done more in this area. And as for development of rules, as you can see from this table, 15 out of the 24 chapters include some changes provisions. So the one in yellow, chapter 21, is new chapter. And then the one with green line is the kind of the substantial development, which also the Mr. Matsuura mentioned some part of rule of origin and then financial services, which completely agree. And then the highlight is electronic commerce. And the e-commerce provision in SEPA expand the scope by reflecting new technology, and then really that gives much further than e-commerce provision in EU-Japan. And then also that, well, even as Matsuura said, I analyze much more than, even some areas more than SEPA, and then very much same to the UK, EU-Japan Digital Trade Agreement. I agree with that. And so that e-commerce provisions in SEPA clearly indicate UK's departure from the EU's digital trade policy approach that values more data privacy and security, and then it shifts towards, it goes towards the Asia-Pacific and the US-style market-oriented approach that values more market dynamism and innovation. Both the UK and Japanese business widely welcome the substantial development of the SEPA e-commerce provisions, However, I note the UK public, civil society organization and consumer organization show strong concern on these provisions, especially the relation between the free trade balance between free data flow and data privacy. Lastly, I'd like to say about investment. Unlike e-commerce provisions, no substantial development of investment provision to enhance Japan-UK investment were made under SEPA in comparison with EU-Japan. So SEPA includes only the provision for review on the investment protection and investment state dispute settlement issues, and a possible inclusion of these functions in the agreement in the future. Next slide, please. So then what is economic implication? So as everybody knows, this is very much economic value relative to the EU-Japan EPA is very limited. So according to the UK Department for International Trade, this is a macroeconomic model, said relative to WTO terms, well, economic gain for the UK accounts for £1.5 billion. That means 0.07% increase in GDP for long term. And for Japan, likely that similarly, the £1.5 billion increase, that means a 0.04% increase in its GDP. Of course, what economic model is always the matter of the discussion, and then how much we can include deep the integration, really the issue. But somehow it says, well, it does not show so much significant increase or very limited economic value at the macroeconomic level. But I would like to say that at the microeconomic level, I can see the kind of synergy between the UK and Japanese companies, and I already saw several sectors where they started, bilateral dialogue, and the SMEs have a kind of incentive to search for the new market. So that kind of synergy is very important, and we can't under-evaluate it. And the next one, please. So the next is social implication. So that my concern is, well, the free trade agreement like EU-Japan and SEPA and then also CPTPP, so which we call deep free trade agreement. So this is not simply market access in trading goods and trading services maybe to some extent, but regulatory issues matter. So what does it mean for the UK? So the UK-Japan SEPA is going to be the benchmark for its future FTA negotiations. But when it comes to the FTA negotiations, of course, while the US, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, they want to export their agriculture products. And then UK society, they're very much concerned about food standards. And also digital trade is also another very interesting example that this is only area where the UK-Japan SEPA made substantial development. But even though inside the UK, there is already the kind of the concern, and then they just, the civil society said, no, we don't want this. We want to stay in the EU type of the framework. And then also investment protection is other issues. The UK has not yet made that position of the investor state dispute settlement or the investment court system. So that this is one of the reasons, but under SEPA, there is no progress made. Also mutual recognition agreements and regulatory alignment with the EU matters a lot. And then because this is the unsettled issues, SEPA could not make any specific progress in this area as well. So lastly, could you just go to the, yeah. So which way for the UK? So regulatory choice and global governance. This is a kind of area of dilemma for the UK. Once departing from the EU, they become the independent trade nation, but now they have to make their own decision and establish the regulatory framework. But ambitious FTA for what? Ambitious FTA to which direction? So is it simply going to the UK style or Asia Pacific style regulatory framework, or what kind of the role the UK would like to play in the global governance? this is completely the kind of area unknown, and the UK domestic level, there's so much debate has to be taken in this area. Otherwise, I'm afraid backlash will take place, and anti-FTA, anti-global trade will kind of movement will take place for a long time. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Minako-san, and thank you for your kind references to my book from so many years ago. You're very kind and welcome. Thank you for that very, very broad and penetrating, actually, analysis of the deal and of its implications and what it tells us, I think, particularly about where some of the dilemmas or at least choices are going to be for UK trade policy after this year and after this agreement, and for highlighting especially the importance of the micro significance, which I think is the key one. Now, immediately I'm going to ask a question that some questions that have been put in the Q&A function, and I invite, as always, people to attendees to put their questions. But Paul Farrelly, former Labour MP, has asked exactly the question I was going to ask immediately. So I will read out his question rather than making my own. Paul says, "Arigatou gozaimasu," and welcome back, Matsuura-san. Could I ask, what, if any, would be the consequences for the UK-Japan agreement of a no deal on trade between the UK and the EU? Or is the UK-Japan deal entirely stand alone? Perhaps we can have both of you comment on that, but first, Hiroshi.
Sure. As everybody knows, this Japan-EU agreement is only half of the full picture, or even less than half of the full picture. And for the continuous operation, business operation for UK and Japanese businesses, the EU-UK agreement is very important, even more important than the Japan-UK agreement. So if the business wants to continue the present operation as it is now, the lack of agreement between the Japan and EU, if that will be the case, it will be a very, very difficult one. So we are in earnest hope that the present negotiation between EU and the UK will be reached very soon, certainly by the end of this year. But what I can say right now is that Japan-UK bilateral agreement will at least save part of the life of the Japanese-UK business. And also, I would say that this agreement gives the new framework. With or without the business partnership between UK and the EU, at least Japanese company in UK have the treaty framework between London and Tokyo, and then from that viewpoint, they can think about the future of their business in UK. So I think even without the proper agreement between EU and UK, there is some significance of this bilateral agreement. Back to you, Bill.
Thank you, Hiroshi. Minako, would you like to comment on what happens if there is a no deal on January the 1st? The UK-Japan arrangement comes into effect. What's the effect of a no deal on that?
Yeah, thank you very much, Bill. The EU-UK no deal is the disaster, the worst case scenario, which we did not want to, have, but it's going to be maybe the worst case scenario, 50-50% and the knife edge. And then I think, in terms of capacities, the large companies have the kind of a capability to respond to this worst scenario. Then somehow, of course, for the cost-wise, takes a lot of cost, but even though they are preparing for that, they were reviewing the business model for coming years, and then at the global level, maybe not to the EU, go to the EU, but maybe go outside completely from the Europe. And then so that's the kind of the no deal scenario is going to be the kind of very strong, historical change, the turning point also business model in Europe and then at the global level as well. And also the impacts of the no deal differs across the sectors. The most significantly badly affected sector will be the Japanese manufacturing sector. And then service sector more or less can be more flexible, the moving its headquarters to the EU27. And then also trading data, that kind of the cross services, that we say the cross border services, that is very important for services sector. So that somehow, well, that will not affect so much in that perspective. But on the other hand, as it's a movement partners, it matters a lot, and the mutual recognition agreement as well. So completely, that this is a kind of the the resetting of the business model.
Just thank you, and so just to follow up on that myself, I mean, Hiroshi, you mentioned the rules of origin arrangements. I mean that in effect carry over, as you put it, the EU-Japan agreement, and that the UK-Japan one had rules of origin arrangements and all goods at least as good as in the EU-Japan. So if there's a no deal, is that then void? I mean, whereas if we have no arrangements with the EU over rules of origin, how does that then affect Japanese companies in the UK?
Well, this is exactly where the UK-Japan agreement is only less than half of the story.
Yes.
If the UK companies or Japanese companies want to keep the business as it is now, using the Japanese parts, European parts freely to produce goods in UK and export back to European Union or to Japan, there has to be a comparable system and of rules of origin on the EU-UK side. But now, prospect now of the negotiation is not so clear if there's going to be the similar setup in the rules of origin. And if not, as Minako said, the significant resetting of the business model has to follow.
Thank you. And Minako, another questioner who hasn't given their name, but has said about this question about Japanese headquarters in the UK. As they say, 2019 already, some companies such as Shionogi and Sony have moved their HQs away from the UK to the EU, specifically the Netherlands, over a possible Brexit. Keeping in mind the importance of this trilateral arrangement, do you imagine a similar movement to the EU, exodus to the EU, to continue despite the signing of the comprehensive partnership agreement? Do you think the forces are still there, or will the CPA, in the event of a deal, let's go back to a deal scenario, do you think that then leaves it as a status quo?
Yeah, thank you very much for a very interesting question. I think whether SEPA is, well, SEPA, the UK-Japan SEPA, the role is mostly about the continuity of the EU-Japan EPA. And then also in terms of rule of origin, as Mr. Matsuura said, well, the trilateral diagonal accumulation with the EU is unsolved. And then there's so many issues unsolved in relation with the EU side decision. And then the company cannot wait for this. And even there is an agreement between the EU and the UK, I'm afraid it's going to be kind of shallow agreement, and so many issues, unsolved business will be going to be that kind of the future negotiation and then they put into future clauses. And so the situation will not change whether the SEPA is now here or not. Well, then they really, this is a kind of last minute of the last minute decided for the Japanese company. And they already, more or less that they just took action, but SMEs for especially, this is really the last minute decision.
Thank you. So I'm going to move on to services. and which then leads in towards all that e-commerce and digital trade point that both of you emphasized as being where this agreement goes beyond the EU-Japan deal. Pernilla Rudlin, who's a fellow board member of the Japan Society, has asked Dr. Morita-Jaeger, do you think that the large amount of services exports to Japan from UK by foreign-owned companies is related to the large proportion of Japanese FDI in the UK? In other words, do the services exports represent, for example, payments to UK-based lawyers, financiers for M&A, management fees, and so forth, and host? Are the two things linked? And then I'll move it on to the prospects afterwards. But specifically on that question, Minako-san.
Yeah, thank you. As I show in the figures, the more that foreign firms based in the UK export the service export from outside to the UK, they're much more than the UK, companies. In that perspective, well, the Japanese companies' investment in UK, of course, will they create the UK's export to Japan as well. But to what extent, how that percentage, I have to check. I think I can have the kind of economic analysis of there, then that will be the very good case studies. And the services, liberalization is about domestic regulatory framework and the regulatory cooperation. In this perspective, well, financial sector this time, they had a very good substantial progress, and especially regulatory cooperation between the two UK and the Japanese authorities, and also new financial services, and there are much more details provided. But more than that, unfortunately, the financial services sector in the SEPA does not show so much progress, especially and then in the UK. Always, looking at the evaluating the UK-Japan SEPA from the UK's perspective, this is how much the UK could gain from the SEPA. But on the other hand, I'd like to just say one thing I did not mention because of my limited time for presentation today is what the UK offered to Japan. And I checked the UK's commitment and Japanese commitment both in detail, and I found very strange situation from the UK's service commitments. So normally they took the same way of commitment as EU-Japan, and they made that in principle they will commit everything except for something. So they made a list of reservation in the FTA, and so the UK's reservation they refer to the the measures incompatible with this liberalization is mostly EU directives in the EU regulations are written. So now the UK is independent from the EU single market, but still read the EU directives regulation written there. What is the implication and how the business can read this? This is very confusing especially for users' point of view. So what would the kind that the development will make in the future, and that does not show the kind of certainty for the private sector. So, so in this case, SEPA still has so many things to do for future unfinished business.
Thank you, Hiroshi. Perhaps actually I'll move on to a question for you on financial services, since Minako has been mentioning that. Emma Wegoda has said, thank you for excellent presentations. How do you see the FTA in terms of financial services and implications for Tokyo's prominence as a top financial services center? Hiroshi, what are the implications of this arrangement for financial services?
Well, for so long time, Tokyo has been aspiring to be a bigger financial center for the global financial services, with only partial success, or let me put it this way. And this new agreement, as I mentioned to you, is more liberal than the present setting under the Japan-EU agreement. but it's modest. The free flow of data and the information unprohibited by the authorities is a matter of course already under the liberal financial services world, so nothing new. In that sense, this new progress in the bilateral agreement is only a fail-safe safeguard against the backward movement, and it cannot be the real main engine for promoting the further progress in this sector. But nonetheless, it is a stronger safeguard than the previous one, and so it has some significance. And given the strongness of the UK's financial services and its willingness to go into the Japanese market, it could be one tool to boost the Japanese willingness to become the more robust financial services center.
And staying with you, Hiroshi, Duncan Bartlett, former BBC correspondent in Japan, has asked, he says, I'd like to welcome back Minister Matsuura. How does he see the role of the UK within the comprehensive and progressive agreement for the Trans-Pacific Partnership? And others have asked also questions about TPP. Is this, to what extent is this going to be an alternate rulemaking forum for the world? And how might that develop, and what role do you think the UK and Japan might play in that?
Okay, well, there is no set avenue toward that rulemaking role of the TPP yet. But as I said in initial remarks, having the UK as a member, then the nature of the TPP will be changed. It will become a more global status. And we have to go back to the history of FTA making, EPA making. We started this bilateral preferential arrangement not as the best tool for global liberalization, but only the second best. The best case is the WTO-led round style global liberalization at once with broader membership. So that has the glorious history of WTO and GATT, but now after the so long negotiation under the Doha round, the WTO seems to be stopping that function at this moment. Therefore, we have resorted to this means of the bilateral FTAs, regional FTAs, etc. But this, what is this situation right now? We have this, the so-called spaghetti ball phenomenon, where one nation is bound by so many different sets of rules, depending on the trading partners, and that is intricately complex for the business actors. So the best case is to resolve this spaghetti situation to a simpler one. But what is the avenue for it? If the TPP as a platform grows as a more global platform with broader membership from various parts of the world, it could turn to be a platform or a prototype for faster liberalization even for the rest of the membership. So if the TPP acquires broad enough membership and big enough numbers of the membership of the WTO, then that could provide the vehicle for another round of negotiation, hopefully. So that's the kind of avenue I am conceiving personally.
That's fair. No, that makes absolute sense to me. And Richard Jerram, an economist, has asked, what would be the main areas of difficulty if the UK wants to join TPP? What has to be overcome for the UK? Can you expand a little on that, Hiroshi?
Well, There are two stages. As soon as we enter into the new year next year, I think the British government will try to convince the existing members of TPP to accept UK as a negotiating partner. But the UK has to get all 7 countries in line to start the negotiation. So that's Japan already openly says that we welcome UK as a potential member of the TPP, but what will be the response of the 6 others? That is the first hurdle the UK has to overcome. The second one is the items or the issues which Japan and the UK was not able to give solution to during the course of the bilateral negotiations of the Japan-UK FTA. But the exact provision of that nature is set in the TPP. For example, Minako mentioned the investment chapter. Investment chapter, the TPP includes the protection provisions and also the ISDS provisions. But in the Japan-UK, we were not able to agree on. Minako also mentioned about, did you, Minako, but among the digital trade portfolio, there are provisions of the no different treatment of digital products under TPP. But in the Japan-UK, we were not able to agree on it. So these are the kinds of things UK needs to stop and think a while how to overcome the difficulties.
That's very helpful. Thank you. No, that's very, very, very specific guide. Thank you. Now, there's 2 questions about the chapter on women's economic empowerment. And Minako-san, I wonder if you could address that. Kaori Sato has asked, thank you for a comprehensive presentation. Could you give more details of the trade and women's economic empowerment? What kind of actions will be implemented? What's the substance? And there was another question. Richard Skyver also says, what do either of you think, what new initiatives could we expect to see being driven from the agreements on women's economic empowerment? Minako-san, why don't you start? Is there substance here?
Yes, thank you very much, Bill. Maybe this issue, maybe Matsuura-san will be the best to answer, but my general understanding is, this kind of a deep trade agreements, the more, the scope is expanded and the more into the area of the social related issues. And in that sense, the inclusion of trade and then women's, the economic empowerment is an important step. That in terms of substance, how it is, powerful for that, but in terms of implementation and so on, I have a big question. So this is a good step, but it does not mean that we'll have a kind of the obligation for something like that. But this is much more the level of the political declaration of the engagement between the 2 countries.
Thank you.
If you doesn't have an opinion, then I will be happy to hear. I was also wondering what this implication on this chapter.
Hiroshi, is this a political declaration or is there anything specific in it?
Well, I have no particular things to add, to be frank with you, but this is a political clause, but it reflects the joint aspiration of the 2 nations. So depending on the ideas and the initiatives of the leaders of the 2 countries, it could develop to more substantive, more concrete initiatives.
Right, thank you. Now, Paul Diamond has asked, actually directed very much at you, Matsuura-san, which is really an internal business in Japan question, warmly welcomes you back, congratulates you. Practical follow-up in Japan for aspiring British exporters. He asks, bureaucratically, will METI take the lead on this? And do you see a role for the British Market Council under Chairman Asada set up by the then MITI in 1973, or what other organizations should companies think about?
Well, I don't have a good answer to it. Well, we have the entry into effect on the first day of the January, and then we will see the initial phase of the implementation of it. And then we will have the joint committee and the subcommittees, and then through the operation and the implementation of the letters of the agreement, we will find the best way to drive to give the further drive to the trade.
Fine, thank you. Now there's a few questions about free movement of people. Connor Scott Butcher asks, will the agreement have any effect, positive or negative, on the free movement of British students to study in Japan? Martin Barrow asks, in addition to enhancing family visa arrangements, can we do more together to enhance people-to-people links in developing education and tourism links, which have great potential in both directions? Is there anything you would like to add on either of those issues, Hiroshi?
Well, I don't see any negative dynamism to stop the flow of British citizens into Japan, and there are even some I don't remember exactly where it was, but treatment of interns and the student travels. There has a slight improvement on British access to the Japanese market. It is only a small step, but with the willingness of the both sides, this could be amended for promoting the further flow of the people on both directions.
Someone has just added anonymously, will the movement of people include the right to work? Does it, how is, I mean, you mentioned specifically intercompany transfers, and obviously that always comes with permissions to work. But is there a broader clause for people outside intercompany transfers that facilitates the ability to work, or is that a separate issue?
Well, the agreement doesn't have any sectors treating with the right to work, but our presupposition is that both UK and Japan are the long-standing members of ILO, and both of them have committed to so many basic agreements of ILO to provide sufficient guarantee of the workers' rights.
Right, okay, well, thank you. And Minako-san, is it sort of a broad question that I think you should answer as we come towards an end. Andrew Fraser, who's an advisor at Mitsubishi Corporation, asks, will the EU and UK trade deals increasingly persuade Japanese companies that investment in Europe is actually less necessary? With tariff-free access in time, will products like automobiles or electronics be supplied from Japan or other locations, as Honda seem to have judged to be preferable? Is the combination of these two deals in this tripartite arrangement that you said, what impact might that have on location decisions for manufacturers? Minako-san.
Thank you. Yeah. So the location decision for the Japanese manufacturing companies, it really depends on a specific company's business strategy. And for example, some companies just already had from the beginning that they had the headquarters in Ireland. So they just could avoid, this mess. And on the other hand, well, most of the company had have headquarters in London, or also factories inside England. And I mean it more like what I can just simply say is the end of the friction trade, whether it's there's a agreement between the UK and the EU or not, there is the end of the frictionless trade. That means for the company, adjustment cost and then other all this increase in cost, that gives the kind of the reduced attractiveness in the UK. Of course, what a big company can, adjust themselves and then just reallocate part of this function and so on. But the thing is, always the company has to just evaluate the cost and the profits. And so the manufacturing sector, I must say, is the really hardest hit sector, but it really depends on a company's business strategies. And then also the technological development and the digital trade and so on. The things which are not affected directly from the EU-UK, there's so many issues. So I must say that my concern is more about the small SMEs. They don't have a capacity to react, and they don't know what to do, that's not enough information. So then actually the role of the SMEs in this type of economy is getting more big role SME than chances. So this is a kind of the area where the EU-UK trade agreement exists or not, and then that will of course impact more to the small business both in Japan and the UK both.
Thank you. Well, I've come to the end of our hour, and it's been a very rich hour in terms of the specifics, the detail, the context that we've heard laid out by both our speakers, Hiroshi Matsuura and Minako Morita-Jaeger. I want to thank you both very warmly for taking the time to be with us today and for giving such good, clear, comprehensive presentations and answering so many questions. I thank the audience as well, the size of which shows the level of interest in this issue, which has been a great audience. And thank you for all your questions. We have another webinar on Thursday of this week on further education on universities with David Richardson from the University of East Anglia and Yuko Takahashi, president of Tsuda University in Japan. So you'd be very welcome to join us again. But meanwhile, thank you again, Hiroshi Matsuura and Minako Morita-Jaeger, and thank you all for joining us today.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.